All right. We're back. This is episode 2 of Saint Life Podcast. I have a special guest with me, Curt Kennedy, again. He was with me for the first episode, and I'm hoping to do this episode and maybe one more. It's always nice to have you, Curt. How you doing today?
Good, man. Appreciate it, bro. It's always good to chop it up with you, man.
That's what's up. The first episode, by the way, this episode is called Black is King. Black is King Part 2. That's what today is. And the first episode, we dealt with justice, getting to know Curt a little bit. We talked about even mercy and justice in different language, in the Greek and the Hebrew, and how they're very much connected to righteousness, and just living out your faith. So today, I'm hoping to get into some more black issues and how they relate to us as Christians. I do want to start off with this, man. A couple weeks ago, when the George Floyd case was being settled, and they found my man guilty on all 3 charges, right at that same time, for the last couple of years, I go through a bunch of different shows, and I was going through a different world. You remember that show?
Different world. You have Dwayne Wayne in them.
Yes, exactly. And so as I'm going through it, you won't believe it, but the episode that I pull up on, like the one that I pick up every couple months, I watch a couple episodes, and then every couple months I pick up. So the episode that I turn it on, this is season 6, episode 1 and 2. And I don't know if you remember these episodes, but it was their honeymoon. It was when Dwayne and
Whitley,
they got married and they were going through their honeymoon. Do you remember that episode?
I don't, man.
Okay.
I don't. I liked the different world, but I wasn't like on it like other people were. But I did like it, but I don't know if I remember. I don't know if I was with them by season 6.
Okay, yeah. I mean, they did start to lose out on some fans, and they started switching the thing up. But in this episode, for the season 6 opener, and this is a little historical context. This is I want to say this was during the Rodney King riots. So that happened in, I think, May of that year. Was it 92?
It was 91, I think.
91. Yeah, that riot happened in May. This episode came out in September. So this is coming fresh off of that. This is before social media. So everything, it's not like instant response. Sometimes you'll see people's response a year later, and it's still kind of new. You know what I mean? And
right.
So they're responding to the Rodney King riots in LA. They took their honeymoon in LA, and right in the middle of their honeymoon, the riots start happening. And they're dealing with everything that was going on in LA.
That's crazy.
All of the breaking into stores, messing up property. And I was just thinking about, we just dealt with this situation last summer. The BLM thing, because I'm 31. So last summer, whenever those riots were happening, that's the first time that I remember as an adult and really just being conscious of those things happening like that, at least in my lifetime. Now, I'm sure you remember the Rodney King riots. And all
I remember all of it, yeah.
I was 2 years old when that happened. Yeah. So I don't remember that. But last year was the first time for me, and so I felt like it was something new. But watching that episode and them discussing it, all of the same topics that we're dealing with today, they were dealing with in 91. Police brutality, black on black crime, and then how do we get on the cops and the government for treating black people a certain way when we treat our own people a certain way.
Right, all of it, yeah.
It was just crazy. And me and my wife were watching that, and we were just looking at each other like, it's just crazy how history repeats itself, man, in so many different ways.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah, so I thought, man, it'd be perfect to get into this today, talk about blacks and culture. So let's start off with this. Did you get a chance to check out the documentary, the album that Beyonce put out, Black is King?
I watched some of it. I didn't watch it cover to cover. And that's less about what the documentary was. I think this is just the way that I am. I just don't like to, I'm not drawn to things everybody is trying to be drawn to, right? So that's just the way that I am. So I just was like, I heard about it, but oh man, can't wait to watch. I was just like, man, I ain't watching that joint, man. So I'm aware of it, saw some of it, and I know the tenets of it. I've heard enough about it.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of breakdown videos.
Mm-hmm.
When I was watching that video, when I was watching the documentary, I saw a lot of things that it didn't surprise me, because I know kind of where Beyonce's been at for the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years of her career. Ever since she really came out solo, she's been on this type of tip right here. But I did see a lot more of it than I saw before, which was witchcraft, the voodoo type of stuff, the black spiritual religions, the African spiritual religions and stuff like that.
Yoruba, right? Yoruba.
Yes. And we're seeing more of that start to show up in mainstream culture, and I see more and more people embracing that type of spirituality as black people. Does that concern you at all when you see that type of stuff?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I think it does on a few levels. I think one, so there's a lot of talk about like, why do we keep bringing up slavery and things like that, but really what I think we have to realize is that like we're historical people by design. I think it's biblical. I mean, when God would sometimes send the prophets to talk to Israel, he would say, "Thus says the Lord, I the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt." Like he remembered, he wanted them to remember what they, and sometimes when he was judging them, he told them, it was historical, right? We're historical people. We celebrate the gospel. The gospel is a historical event. Everything. If I ask you, man, how's your day going? Your feelings might be in the present, but your description of events is going to have already happened, right? So we are always living in the present and the past sort of at the same time, because we can't live in the future because it hasn't happened yet and we don't know it. So when we want to understand what's going on, we have to think about what's happened prior to this moment to help us. Every moment is a product of the moment before or moments before. So when we think about, what happens in the black community and all that, and why all this is coming up now, a lot of this is some unfinished business historically. And I think what some of the challenge is that the people who, people nowadays, if you say certain things, it's woke or Marxist, but there's just history, right? History is this. White men who owned property were the ones who determined what it meant to be an American and who had access to the American dream. And that lasted for a long time. And now more people have access to it, and everyone's evaluating the validity of its claim. And it's coming up wanting. There are people who are realizing like, hey, listen, man, this American dream that you're talking about, like I'm not experiencing that. And black people who are apart from Native Americans or natives, indigenous people group, the Indians, what we call them, who were here before everyone, we're the longest ethnicity here since white people. White people got here in 1607. We came 1619. So we've been around for 400 years, black people have. And so when we think about a lot of these things and we look at some of the challenges that we have, a lot of what we see happening and struggles in the black community are largely connected to the complicity of, well, one, just the legacy of racism and slavery, but also the complicity of the church. And there's unfinished business that didn't happen. There wasn't really a cultural contrition that ended racism. It wasn't one that ended slavery either. Those were decisions that, because if it were contrition that ended slavery, then Jim Crow wouldn't have happened. If it were contrition that ended civil rights, then Martin Luther King wouldn't have been marching 4 years after the Civil Rights Act was signed. There wouldn't have been COINTELPRO, the FBI running a counterintelligence program against black people. There's so many things you could point to. And so there's an unfinished business, because when the quote unquote systemic racism ended in 1964, there was no punitive reality. There was no, who was punished for their crimes against black people. So what happened was, it was like, hey, we're changing the laws. You're now allowed to make capital, right? This is a capitalistic country. You're allowed to make capital. So you shouldn't be complaining anymore. Now the onus is on you to do, but there was no sense of transitional justice, no sense of, hey, it might take you guys a while because we've held you back for so long. There was just this almost presumption that black people should be forgiving and move on. And it's like, nah, there was no punishment. There was nothing that happened. There was nothing. And they talk about, well, you got affirmative action and all these things and these programs that were given. Listen, those programs came from taxes. Black people pay taxes. So it was part of our money was going back into funding our program. So again, there was no real justice done. There was no one held accountable for what they did. It was just like, okay, move on. And then even in the church, there was no, when did systemic racism in the church? It wasn't like the church prior to 1964 was united and complicit and the world caught up. No, it was the government, the world that says we're going to end this. But when did that happen in the church? And you don't see that. And so someone pointed out to me, what about the Southern Baptist resolution on slavery in 1995, or the PCA had a couple public apologies in the 1990s. Okay, so systemic racism, quote unquote, ended in 1964. So it took the Southern Baptist Convention 31 years to publicly say they're sorry. So again, there was a presumption on black people, and you get to a point for some black people where enough is enough. I need, these people don't care about who I am, and I need to find who I am. And so now there's this resurgence of finding who I am as a black person. And that's why this Yoruba stuff is attractive. This is why Black Lives Matter is attractive, because we want something, we want to show that someone cares about us. This isn't about Marxism and critical race theory. And this is about, you don't care about us. And you've proven that through your works, your efforts, your word and your deed. So we no longer trust you and are looking to you. And so you're seeing droves of black people not even consider the church, because in many ways, a lot of where we're at, the church was complicit in. And so when I see these things, I think black Hebrew Israelites are the stepchild of Christianity. I mean, you had all these black people who were relating to Moses. They felt like they were the Israelites in Egypt, waiting for Moses to come. They identified with those people because they were enslaved. And at some point, it clicked, like, you know what? We are the original Hebrews. Like, this is about us. Why wouldn't it be about? And then it becomes a theology and all this stuff. And then you see this happening. A lot of this, brother, I think is the result of unfinished business. Because for white people, it's like, hey, man, we're not doing that anymore. Let's let that go. But it's not about, do you still do this? It's, do you understand the reverberating consequences that have affected? Like, when's the last time you heard any of these people do a study on the psychological impact of Martin Luther King's assassination? Do people even know what that did to the black community? To see a dude who was peaceful, who was nonviolent, who was articulate, that was the last of the great leaders that we had. And he was killed. And what the psychological, this is after civil rights. This is after this systemic racism.
That was after Malcolm X was killed too.
Exactly. He was killed a couple of years. So again, I think what you have is, there's just, for black people, we don't have the legacy of seeing things as isolated incidences. We see things as mosaics. And so it fits. So we talk about this phrase, obviously, fitting the narrative, right? A lot of these things fit a historical narrative that hasn't changed on some level. And that's where a lot of this is coming from. And so the result of that is black people being like, man, I'm going elsewhere. And so, yeah, it bothers me, man, because I think, if some police officer had just gone to prison for their treatment of black people, I don't think Black Lives Matter would have existed. I can't imagine. I think it wouldn't exist. If Trayvon, if that Georgia Amendment would have got put in prison, and other people, it just would have been like, the fact that Derek Chauvin's trial for many people was such a big deal, the conviction is proof that the many black people who have had the courage to step up and share their issues have been basically, son, like, come now. You're being a little too, that's not really, let's pull out the facts. Only 9 black people were killed. It's all that type of stuff where, and I think what's happened is white people have just lost the ability to define sort of the reality as what it means to be an American now. And that's what we're seeing happen.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. episode 3, I'm the next episode, I'm hoping to get into more of blacks in the church, but you did bring up a point. You feel like the black community felt let down by the black church leaders at a certain point. Maybe Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, and all of those guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why a lot of times we're seeing black leaders today, they don't even go to church. They're not hardcore Christians anymore. We're seeing more of the black leaders turn out to be, atheists, or they're very liberal, and they're more on the side of being against.
But they're pragmatists, though. Like they're atheists in the sense that they don't believe in what we believe in, but they're not really. The atheist is not their calling card. They're pragmatists.
Right.
They want to see stuff done. They're not caring about which God it comes from. That the God of the Bible, for them, has allowed a lot of these things to happen, and so to them, I think it's less about I don't believe in God and more about I believe in practical strategies and philosophies that expose and that change.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing happening in the black community. Guys like Ibram Kendi and stuff. These are academics. They're thinking like, hey, I'm after things that work. Christianity doesn't work. It's actually part of the problem. And that's I think the perspective of some black people.
I would definitely agree with that sentiment right there when it comes to people feeling let down and feeling like Christianity is the problem. I've heard that many times. I've heard that people voice that type of opinion right there. If you're not for pro-black, then you are against.
Yeah.
And Christians, we're not the first ones to step up for the most part. Not the first ones to step up and say, it's all black or nothing else. You know what I mean? And it seems like if you're not totally sold out to the black struggle, then you're an enemy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. It's just because this is the thing, and I don't want to jump too far ahead because I think I know where we're headed, but I'll just say this. What's being masked right now as biblical justice versus social justice is really not true. It's really conservative justice versus liberal justice.
Right.
And part of the challenge that we see happening is that liberal justice is basically about vengeance. Literal justice is about vengeance and being vindictive. And so liberal justice, you have to, if you don't agree with it. So it's true that there is a narrative that's being had. But I think, there's a deeper thing I think is going on, to be honest. I think a lot of this stuff is a smokescreen, to be honest. But yeah. I'll say this, what I was going to say was, there is a sense where liberal justice is about vengeance, and it's fed up with the patience that black people have been told they need to have, or the assimilation that needs to happen. That happened a lot in the black church in 2000, the year 2000, in the 2000s. So I think, they can be really like angry and bitter, and if you're black and you don't agree with that, then man, like, because they're not about, liberal justice doesn't care about the Imago Dei in terms of responsibility and all that stuff. It just cares about saying, hey, blaming stuff and it's vengeance. It's your fault. You did this. It's because of you. And while there's some truth to that, this is what makes it, there's truth, and it's on both sides. It's complicated. It's not as simple as personal culpability versus corporate responsibility. It's not that simple, man. And so I think the black church has let a lot of people down, and black leaders, because really they haven't been able to do a lot for black people. I mean, if we're being honest, bro, entertainment has done more for black people than the church ever did, or politicians ever did. It was the sovereignty of God to give black people the ability to sing, to play sports, to rap, to dance, and to act that eventually won people over. Martin Luther King was marching with a lot of Catholics, not Protestants, man. It wasn't a church. So I'm not saying he didn't do work, but what helped win people over was the fact that dudes could ball. You may not like black people. Go ahead.
When you mentioned the church not doing much for the black community, you're talking about mostly the white churches, right?
Yeah, I'm talking mostly about the
churches?
evangelical white church. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Because I was gonna say, I know people would argue on the other side of that and say that black churches have been very instrumental in the black.
No, we've always been. Black churches have. I mean, black churches is where the black dignity came from. So there's always been. So black people have always had more of a social element because we're the ones that experience the social injustice, so it's the white American evangelical church, which I would say mostly white Christians, and that goes from fundamentalists to mainline Protestants. I just think there was a lack of attention, a lack of pursuit, and even afterwards, as things were getting better, racially, there was a lack of, and I could be wrong here. I've asked a few people, and so far, no one's able to tell me I'm wrong. But I don't know. There wasn't a great migration of white people to black churches to help bring unity. There was always a sense of, hey, come to our churches. And so black people have always had to migrate towards white churches because and this is just in God's sovereignty, he allowed white people to be the ones who are the main governance of the country. I mean, you can look at pictures of Congress every year. While there's some black people in there, they're largely white people. Mostly white men, some white women, a few black people here and there. But it's sparse still after 400 years of being in America. So again, I think there's just a lack of trust and a hope deferred. What we're looking at, a lot of it's just a hope deferred, man. Yeah. People are just tired and they're struggling and they just want something different. And if CRT is going to bring about some change, then so be it. That's how people are thinking. Yeah. They're not thinking about like, oh, is this biblical or not? Or is this, they're thinking like, they're not even thinking long term. It's like, look, man, we've been waiting for a long time. I've been waiting too long to think. I've been waiting for a long time. I ain't worried about thinking long term. You know what I'm saying? It's right now. We got now. We don't care who got next. And that's just the, that's just the reality, man.
So as we start to move into the black social issues, right? Because the number one argument always is when we're talking about justice, we talk about police brutality. The number one thing that always comes up is, what about black on black crime? What about, the fatherlessness? What about the lack of black marriages and the failure of them in your communities? Don't you think that contributes to black lives feeling like they're at an injustice in this country? When we're talking about these things, do you think that's a cop-out when people start bringing that stuff up?
Start bringing up like black on black crime and all that stuff?
Yeah, when you bring up justice and then they bring up those things right there, like, hey, I know that you want to deal with the cops beating on black people and stuff, but what about your own problems?
So do I think it's a cop out? Nah, I think there's a valid concern there. I think the challenge is, so it's less about you bringing it up and more about what are you trying to say by bringing that up. And that's the real issue. So to me, sure, first of all, the problem with statements like that is you're making black on black crime unique when it's wherever you live, there's going to be crime. There's Asian on Asian crime, white on white crime. I could pull out crime stats, which you've heard me hit on cross-examine show before. It's typically, most crime is interracial, not intraracial, right? So even though there's some crossover, like prime example, when's the last time you heard of a shootout in Beverly Hills? Like you never have, right? Because black people don't just travel to white neighborhoods and shoot them and kill them.
Right. So,
and you don't see white people, well, you do historically see white people doing that, but that's a different conversation. But what you get is, there are realities to those things that are true. But I think the conversation is fair, but what it does is it isolates and magnifies the crimes that black people commit when God is not going to be like, hey, you were 13% of the population and you could, it's like your crime is your crime. when a white man rapes a white woman, she's not thinking like, well, percentage-wise, black people commit more crime, so I guess it's okay. Like, it doesn't matter. So it's not a cop-out. I think there are real concerns. I think the challenge with that, again, it's the motive for bringing that up. And what's your goal in bringing that up? Like, black people aren't unaware of black on black crime. Like, we're not unaware of what happens in the black communities. We're not all just celebrating it like, hey, as long as no. But I think the one thing that I don't know why this is difficult for people to get is when it comes to police shooting a black person, the problem is the police have on the side of their cars or at somewhere on their badges to protect and serve. There is an expectation that you are paid by my tax dollars to protect my life or the life of my children or loved ones. Black people, just regular, the dude across the street, I don't have expectations for him. I just hope that by the common grace of God, he doesn't jump out there and do something crazy. But I don't have expectations placed on other black people because they're not in uniform. Right. I have expectations placed on military because you're in uniform. As a pastor, like, let me think about this for a second. I'm gonna use a graphic illustration that's not true of me at all, but I want to say this in by God's grace. But if I were to commit adultery, and let's just say I had sex with a girl that was 19, all right? I'm in my 40s, or I had sex with a girl that's 19, and it gets out. Here's what people are gonna say. That was spiritual abuse. Look how younger she is. She basically, like, he was probably grooming her from when she was to all of that stuff. They can't get me for statutory rape because she's 19. It's legal, right?
Right.
But it's going to affect people more. Why? Because of my position as a pastor. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, if she has sex with another dude, it's not it doesn't have a certain position, doesn't have a certain way people are supposed to see them, then it is what it is. They might even be on her like, man, she is tripping. She just letting anybody hit that. But because I'm a pastor, it's spiritual abuse. Now, no one's even going to consider that, you know what? Wrong or right, age difference or not, I fell in love with this girl and she fell in love with me. And the sex was consensual and we enjoyed it. In Hollywood, you can marry somebody 30 years young and nobody says nothing. Right? So again, it's the expectation of the position. When you're a police officer, there is an expectation because of your badge and your gun and your position that we expect. And so there's going to be more outrage when you do it, just like there's going to be more outrage if I do something like that because of my position. It's not real complicated. Mm-hmm. So if I do that and I say, well, listen, there's a lot of men that have sex with women that are young and they're like, well, why don't y'all work? That just doesn't work, right? So it seems to be only when it comes to Black people in law enforcement does this thing happen. And basically what it seems like it's saying is that, like, you need to hush up and not focus on that because you're not, as if Black people can stop Black people from killing each other. Like, we can't, it's not like it. First of all, we're not all monolithic, right? So you got the Black people that are conservatives that come out and say, hey, I don't fit the narrative. We're not monolithic, right? But then they will critique Black people who have different experiences than them and say they're playing the victim. How can they be playing the victim unless you're expecting there to be, I'm not the same perspective as you? But we're not monolithic. So by default, people are going to be different. So when we're talking about these things and people bring these up, sure, I don't think it's a cop-out at all. I think there's legitimacy to them. But I think they bring them up to dismiss the other side of it, where there are legitimate concerns that Black people have and can have and are allowed to have about people who serve in public office.
Good. I'm glad that you dealt with that before I brought up names.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that you've probably seen this interaction already, but LeBron James posted, protect our young Black women and men. And then James White, evangelical guy, theologian, apologist, Christian leader, he responds, so I would like to ask LeBron James, is a 20-year-old Black male in more danger from a white cop or from a 20-year-old Black male? We all know the answer, or we should know the answer. What were your thoughts on that when you saw that? I mean, I know you weren't surprised.
No, I wasn't surprised by him, and I'm not surprised at the sentiment that he's raising. So that, I mean, there's a lot of this is a lot of thoughts I have, right? So these things don't affect me as a black man first, they affect me as a believer first, right? So I look at that and think this is a brother. He's we're all image bearers, but this is a brother who professes to be a Christian. And I'm watching him over and over again hold on to really a secular way of looking at the culture. First of all, what do you care what LeBron James thinks for? Why was that important for you to address LeBron James in that? So I would question the motive of that. Huh?
He's a black leader. That's why.
Yeah, I would question the motive of that. Two, what are you going off of? Like, it's not like all 20-year-olds get killed by ask the mother of a kid who got killed by police what the ratio would be for her, how she processes that. So again, it makes an assumption that black people, that this 20-year-old is probably going to be killed by a black dude more than, and it's like, you know what, man? On many levels, you're using data that, first of all, I don't know how much people realize. I do a lot of research and studying. There's so many numbers out there. There is not an objective set of numbers that people are operating from and then choosing their data, right?
Right.
So that, but I won't even play with that. Here's what I would say. I expected it from him. I think that type of language is not biblical. I don't think Jesus did that. I don't think Jesus commends that type of language. If you're frustrated, brother, bring those frustrations to the Lord. I think it only causes division. Like, there's no one that's going to read that unless you agree with him and and think like, oh man, this guy loves like believers. He loves black people. His critique is always that, right? Why don't you critique the police officers so like they talk about Tony Tempa, right? A white dude who died like George Floyd. Where's the critique of the police officers that did that to him? I watched that video. They killed that man. They lied to his mother. That happened in 2016. They lied to Vicky Tempa and told her that they found him dead already. For 3 years, she was struggling with how did her son die? And then the footage comes out in 2019, the body cam footage, and then it's clear that the officers are the cause of his death. And where's the outrage for that, James White? Like, my problem is when I hear his comments, I don't take him seriously. Not because it doesn't raise any genuine concern or question to ask, because you're selective in what you focus on.
Right.
And as Christians, I think we have the responsibility for balance. If all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, then it must certainly be the people that you're talking about and the people that you stand with. So when I hear for him personally, man, it's just selective. It's selective sovereignty, and all of that. And I think that's why I just don't take him seriously, man. Like, he is a champion for he's a champ in apologetics, but I'm gonna be honest, he's a chump as a believer, bro. As just a person who as a believer, you a champ in apologetics, but you a chump, man, as a Christian. And I just think it's sad to me to see that type of stuff.
Yeah, I get it, man. I get it. So when we bring these things up, I guess the question I'm gonna ask, and I'm sure this will lead us into more conversation, but do you think when we're talking about black issues, understanding these things, being a leader in the community, do you think there's something wrong with calling yourself woke? As a Christian, of course. When a person says, I am woke, anytime that's brought up, it says one thing to one people and it says another to another people.
So here's the Oxford English Dictionary definition of the word woke. All right, this is what Voddie Baucham said was the only dictionary that was accurate. All other dictionaries apparently are not accurate. So here's what he said. Here's the Oxford English Dictionary. Here's its definition of woke: alert to injustice in society, especially racism. That's the Oxford English Dictionary. Alert to injustice in society, especially racism. Okay. At this definition, everyone should be woke based upon this definition. Every Christian should be woke based upon this definition. Alert to injustice in society, especially racism. Not just racism, but injustice in society, especially racism. Every Christian should be woke based on this definition. So to me, when I think, is it wrong to say you're woke? It depends on what you mean by that. Now, because it's become such a pejorative term that saying it's only can be negative. It can only be negative. And so if you're going to say that, then you're basically saying I'm willing to take on the judgment that'll come from identifying with that. In and of itself, based on the Oxford English definition, is it wrong to say that? No, not at all. And this Oxford English, these ain't written by this ain't the African Oxford Dictionary. These white people wrote this definition, right? It's just being alert to injustice, especially racism. So no, I don't think it is a big deal. But the way we define these things, and the way that as a pejorative term, and the way people think about it, yeah, I think it's a problem.
You think it's a problem when Eric Mason talks about it being woke?
For some people.
Okay.
Like, this is the thing, man. Here's the thing. Eric Mason, right? He sometimes has crossed the line. And he recently put out a video and humbled himself and said that someone from his church brought up and he overstepped in the message. And he was actually crying. He was affected emotionally by that. I saw this one dude who I think is just a clout chaser make a video about his apology and walk through it. And I watched about half of it.
I think I know you're talking about.
And I just thought, man, number one, who are you, fam? Like, who are you to, like, you've done, I don't know what you've done for the kingdom. This dude's planted 40-something churches. What have you done, fam? And then you talking about homiletics and all. How often have you preached? How many sermons have you really preached, my brother? Like, it's just like, man, calm down. Like, this stuff is giving people, like, social media is giving everyone, sort of made everybody 6'7". It's like, man, calm down, shorty. Like, you 5'5", and let's just talk for real. Like, I wish I was a little bit taller. Wish that's you. Like, calm down. Like, so he's critiquing the video and saying, like, well, this is trying to use it to expose. But I never hear anybody from that side, the conservative justice. Where are their videos at? Where are the James White videos at apologizing for things that he said? Where are the Tom Burke and Tom Askell and Jeff Durbin, and where are all their videos at? Where's A.D. Robles' video at for apologizing? You don't find them, right? Again, so you always have this happen. So Eric Mason has said some things that I definitely was like, I wish he hadn't said that, or I ain't banging with that. But he's also said things, it's like, yeah, I agree with that. So he would have to define what he means by woke, and what I think he means, I back him. I stand by that. Does that mean some of the rhetoric that he used? No, you get offended. We're human beings, man. Black people are always held to the strictest. It's like we've been trained by Gamaliel, like Paul, to the law of Pharisee. Strict. We're always held with the strictest regard but other people can be imperfect. Right. But we are, and again, that's just another deeper problem. But yeah, I think woke, depending on how you use it, I think it should be based on Oxford English. All Christians should be woke for real.
Well, that's a good. It's a good thing that you just defined that and went through that right quick, because I think it's probably time that we talk about it. I think it's time that we get into the relationship that you have with Voddie Baucham. Let's talk about it. I mean, I know that we kind of referenced it last episode, and I know that you've talked on it before. Yeah. But let's first start with this. You view Voddie Baucham as a brother in Christ.
100%.
You don't 100%. Hate him. You're not at war with him.
No. Okay. I mean, to be honest with you, bro, I can say this with a clear conscience. Like, I don't really hate anybody.
Okay.
This is what people have to understand about me. Listen, I don't clout chase. I'm about grace, but when it comes to smoke, I don't about face. Like, I'm not afraid to deal with and talk about things. You know why? Because I'm not afraid to be wrong either. Listen, if I'm saying stuff and I'm in error, I don't mind. My goal isn't to protect some reputation. Like, I'm about truth. I care about truth. And so I don't, you know, I don't dislike Voddie at all. I mean, he's not my friend. Like, there's a difference, right? So we're brothers. That doesn't mean we're friends, right? I'm not, just because we're brothers doesn't mean we're friends. It just means we're brothers, you know? Right. We both believe in Jesus, and in that sense, we're family. But that doesn't mean we buddies. You know, like, nah, I don't have the time put in with you, you know, to really cultivate that. And I'm not unwilling to do that. But yeah, I don't hate Voddie at all, man.
Okay. Well, what are your thoughts on some, you know, his book? And the reason why I'm bringing up his book is, one, because it's very popular right now. Many people have bought it. But most of what he wrote in his book, we went through at the conference that we had a few months ago. Wrath and Grace conference that we did here in Lancaster, PA. And you guys apparently were at war with one another. What's your thoughts on his book and the content of it? And I guess you could say it is a good picture of what his ministry is nowadays. It seems like that.
Yeah, so Fault Lines is the name of the book. So I'm glad he wrote it. And I think on some level, I think it is necessary that he wrote that. I do think that critical race theory, just culturally speaking, I do think it is a problem, to be honest.
Why?
Because I think it is communicating. It's such a major shift anthropologically. I think that's just dangerous. But we've made a lot of these shifts. The T of the LGBT has been making a shift from the way we think about biologically men and women and having to use different pronouns. So what's happened is we've shifted already from physical identities or biological to psychological identities now. So as a psychological identity, if I think I'm a woman in a man's body, then I'm a woman then. That's my psychological identity, and you have to support that, or else you're harming me, or, you know, or your words kill, all that stuff. I remember when Sticks and Stones don't break my bones. You know what I'm saying? I remember that. But Sticks and Stones break bones, but your words will never hurt me. But anyway, we're just a different society. So there has been such an ideological shift to the psychological identity of people and the acquiescence to that. So there is a submission to people's psychological identities, even if they rival the scientific identity. And that's causing a lot of confusion. And so critical race theory, the way the world is using it and the way the world thinks about it, is also focusing on the psychological identity of people and changing the way we interact and see people and moving us into, really, I don't think anything positive, because if it's true that the world is defined by oppressors and those being oppressed, and we need to go after it, then what happens when those who are oppressed then become the oppressors? Like, what happens when you get to that point? Like, it's a cycle. It's just the same thing. You're going to now be, and that's what you see happening. There is a certain level of vengeance, as I talked about, liberal justice, vengeance, that is trying to oppress white people for benefiting from systems and so forth like that, right? So I think what his book is doing is helpful for people to understand some of the dynamics of what's happening in the culture. It's good for that. And I think I'm glad he wrote it for that. I do think one of the things that I don't understand why this is such a big deal. Well, actually, I do know what I think, but the fact that this is such a big deal, like, to me, this is like the emergent church, man. There was, in the early 2000s, there was sort of a new movement of churches called the emergent church. And I remember Kevin DeYoung wrote a book, Why We're Not Emergent. And there was like all this talk about it splintering off. And I remember me and some staff guys went to an emergent church conference just to see what it was like. And I was like, yeah, man, this stuff is whack. So, you know, it's critical race theory is going to come and go. I think that the idea and the weight of it is really scaring people more than they need to be afraid, to be honest. So I'll say that in terms of that. So I think I'm glad he wrote it. I think it was necessary that he wrote it for some people. The challenge for me with the book is it's not about the scholarship of it, or did he represent critical race theory accurately. I think I'm more concerned with the presumptions of the book and the fruit that comes out of the book for people, the fruit that I'm observing from people.
Right.
And so I'm not going to go back and forth. There are other people that debate whether or not he represented critical race theory, the sufficiency of scripture about him. And I agree with some of those things. Some of them I disagree with. It's not scholarly. Voddie never said he was writing a scholarly book. Like, that's stupid. Like, it's just, you're going to dismiss it because it's not scholarly? Like, what does that mean? If it were scholarly, then people wouldn't want to read it because it might be over their heads. Like, it was it's written for a popular audience. And in that sense, he did a good job.
Yeah.
The things that I struggle with about the book and the concerns that I have is quite a few, but I won't name all of them here, but I'll say this one. One, the book actually critiques what it also celebrates. And that's a challenge to me. So when you spend your whole book talking about the secular, philosophical, conceptual framework that has worked its way into the church, you even name particular people and associate them with buying into this ideology, of which those people do not agree with that. Those people do not agree with that. But we won't even get into that just yet. Let's just say you've associated people with that. You've talked about how dangerous this ideology is and that it's not biblical. And yet you've given no biblical understanding of what it means to be woke. So if you tell me I'm woke, how does a Christian repent of being woke? What does it look like? What does Jesus demand of me if I'm virtue signaling? What does Jesus demand of me for being woke? What does Jesus demand that I do to repent of being a social justice warrior? What does Jesus demand that I do? See, the problem is he uses the same terms, same secular philosophy to describe things that he's accusing people of doing. If you can get all you need, right? Like, here's the reality. If you can get all you need from the Bible about race, then why can't you define what wokeness is by that same Bible? You see what I'm saying? Like, you created a book and you're talking about how much what you're thinking about is biblical, but yet you offer no biblical understanding of what these terms even mean. So you're using the same terms and the same secular philosophical framework to critique them. And I just think that's one of the ways that it's like, wow, brother, you actually celebrate the very things that you're critiquing or you're participating in. So that's an area where I feel like the book is just flawed in that nature. And lay out what all these terms mean biblically. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I missed it. Maybe I missed the page. Let me just say that. Maybe I missed it and I need to go back and check, which I intend to do that. I was asked to give a review on Gospel Coalition of the book, and so I'm going to go back through it again and make sure I didn't miss it. So I could be wrong. Right. I don't remember those terms being explained and all of that. I just hear it's biblical, it's not biblical, and this is that. I don't get that. That's one of the concerns that I have for the book. It's on one level, it's hypocritical to critique people for doing the very thing that you're also doing. I just have a problem with that. And let me add one more to that, what I mean by, let me say one more thing and then you jump in if you have something else. One more thing on that vein, that it critiques the very thing it celebrates. One of the hallmarks of his position and what he calls biblical justice, I think is not. I don't think any of these guys have proven what biblical justice is at all. I mean, just start from the framework that Jesus is the embodiment of justice. He's the application of justice. Can we just even agree to that? Let's just start there. I don't even remember that being in the book. And again, I could be wrong. I'm going to read it again. I could be wrong. It's been a minute since I peeked at it. But it could be wrong. But I don't even remember that. So again, but here's the other problem, what I mean about you celebrate what you critique. One of the main strides of his position is that people are calling things systemic racism based on their lived experience. And lived experience is not authoritative. It has to be based in scripture and all that stuff. But the first two chapters of the book are giving us his lived experience. So he spent, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you spend the first two chapters explaining how you grew up, where you're at, and why you think the way you think. And so it seems like the lived experience is less about truth versus lived experience and more about lived experience that we accept and lived experience that we reject. So if someone else tells their story and they grow up and their conclusion is different than yours, and it has more of a racial bent, then okay, it's woke. You're woke in it. So again, it's not really you. And this is the thing. This is what makes me laugh. When you're talking about people, we are almost always going to be talking about lived experience, brother. I mean, what is the Gospels actually? What is the? It is Jesus's lived experience as the God who became man. That's what it was. Jesus chose that. That's Hebrews 2:14-18. That he became like man in every way, so that he could become a merciful and high priest to God. Since he was tempted, he's able to help those who were also tempted. What is that? That's lived experience. Jesus understands what it feels like to experience temptation. Therefore, he is able to help those who are tempted. Lived experience is fundamentally what it means to be a human being. And you to win your side, to win your argument, you cut off the reality of lived experience for people who disagree with your outcome, your conclusion. Again, you critique the things that you celebrate. The point of those first two chapters is like, hey, I should be woke. I grew up in South Central LA. I grew up with a Buddhist mom and all that stuff. I should be woke, but I'm not. As if to say, because I'm not, then nobody black should be woke. It's like, man, that's your life, fam. Like, I thought we weren't monolithic, right? So again, these are subtle. These are things that I'm just realizing, fam, this is not a good look. This is not a good look. It critiques the there's a ton I could say, but I don't know if you want to say more, but that's one of the things I just think like, wow, this book is really, it's really fascinating to me to see this and to see how this is all playing out.
No, I get it. I think that as we begin to open up these conversations, more and more we'll start to see people begin to divide further and further. I think one thing a few years ago that really drew the line in the sand on where people were going to stand on these issues was that social justice statement that was put out. And he said
2018. August 2018.
August 2018. So we're almost coming up on 3 years now. And I remember when that went out. I didn't know that Voddie was one of the initiators. But I do know that there was a line drawn in the sand on where you stand on social justice. You know, do you think that social justice is something that the Christian church should be focusing on as a good thing, or should we be against it and be fighting against social justice, the term of it and things like that? I think we're starting to see more and more of a divide.
100%. But here's the thing, though. So it's funny that you bring that up, because that's another thing that falls under the realm of what I just said. Mm-hmm. You critique the thing you celebrate. What is abortion? It's a social justice issue.
They won't say that, though. They won't say that.
But it is.
I'm
immigration.
Not even I'm just getting hype because I talk about this all the time.
This is your show. Do what you do. Listen, immigration is a social justice issue. Mm-hmm. You see, they have social justice issues, but they avoid it because they're trying to avoid these things because here's the thing. Conservative justice and liberal justice are being coined as biblical versus social justice. Mm-hmm. Or there may be liberals that think they're doing biblical justice or whatever. Here's the reality, fam. Conservative justice, the main point of conservative justice is not to let liberal justice get any leg up in anything. So it will fight and kick and push back against things that appear to be liberal. And so think about this for a second. Black people, if you're a conservative, you're a Republican, black people largely vote Democrat. So that's liberal. They're liberals. So, and for you can't give in to liberal justice in any way, shape, or form. That's a no-no. This is one of the reasons why, like when black people, when people become liberals, white people become liberals, and I could be wrong here. I don't hear them saying, hey, I'm a liberal, I reject the white narrative but like when black people become conservatives, it's like they got to make it clear, I reject the narrative. I'm a conservative, I voted for Trump. I reject the black narrative of systemic racism. It's almost like being gay, you got to come out. Let me come out and say, hey, I reject the narrative of this. Like, why do you just be a conservative, fam? Like, what is it about you needing to announce that you reject? Again, because it's, if you do not, then the conservative justice, well, they won't accept you. If you say, hey, listen, I'm conservative, but I understand what they're talking about. There's some struggles that black people are facing that you can't just blame on, oh, that's too woke, you're too liberal. You are woke, brother, you've been drinking the Kool-Aid. So again, you have to be a certain way in order to do it. And again, but it's like, you care about social justice issues as a conservative. You just don't want to call them that, because then that gives the liberals, you're using liberal language. It's just fascinating to me how this stuff is playing out.
Yeah. I think that it's similar to white people whenever they start becoming more woke, as we defined it, as the definition defined it. As they're becoming more woke, you hear them say things like, I am not racist and I am against it. It's that whole, that, that's where it opens up the conversation for white guilt and things like that. And then
they act like black people can't have IDs or do math or nothing, and everything's racist, and they think that we're not intelligent enough to take these math tests and all that stuff. Yeah. So again, it's like, you don't care about black people. Like, it's the same fake me old white savior complex. You know what I'm saying? Like, to me,
we're still trying to learn how to use computers, right?
Yeah, right. We just, it's like we just don't know how to do nothing except play ball, and man, put him. He can play ball, he can rap, and he can dance, and man, can we? It's just like, man, get out of here, man. Black people know what we doing with a lot of stuff. They act like, man, we just kindergartners, man. So, and it's just funny, man. The liberal, the people the woke side of things is tripping, bro. They are just, man, they are losing their minds in many ways, man. Just talking reckless, acting like they representing black people, man. Get out of here, man. To me, this stuff is just like, get out of here.
Oh man, let's start to go into that realm right there, blacks in politics, because I think that's where we'll probably conclude today, which is dealing with that whole topic of politics and blacks. We already did discuss how blacks, for the majority, they vote Democrat, right? I grew up in a family that votes heavy Democrat, and I remember this past election, and even last year, I remember family members telling me, all right, don't forget to vote, make sure you vote Democrat. And I said, why do I have to vote Democrat? And they automatically bring up, because Republicans don't care about black people. This seems to be a regular sentiment.
I think it's a perception gap issue for real, but that's a different story.
Yeah, but when we're talking about these things,
right?
Why is it such a big deal when it comes to blacks in politics? Do the Democrats just love the blacks and the Republicans hate the blacks? Do you think that's the case? What do you think that is?
No, I don't think it's that case at all. I think, it's funny because this is kind of I could say a lot here, but I'll whittle it down. So obviously, history tells us that it was the Democrats, Southern Democrats, who wanted to maintain slavery. It was the Republicans who really were the ones that did it, that ended slavery, not the Democrats. The civil rights legislation that Lyndon Johnson signed, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, he was the president, he was a Democrat, but the Senate was mostly Republican. So, the way the House and the Senate are broken up is the House controls the finances for bills, and the Senate controls whatever laws are going to be implemented. So if you're going to change a law, you're going to go to the Senate. If you want funding for that law is when the House votes on it, right? So in the Senate, Republicans were the majority and they agreed to it, which was why it passed. Otherwise, the quote unquote end of systemic racism that happened in 1964 wouldn't have happened if white. So I think just knowing that issue, it's clear that white people don't hate black people. Even though I think there was more capitalistic subscription as the motive for ending slavery, more than there was genuine contrition over the treatment of black people. I don't think it was motivated by that, to be honest. But that's a different conversation. Maybe we'll pick that up next time. So I'm giving this backdrop to say that the idea of thinking that one side hates the other, and I just don't think that's really true. I think it's more complicated than that. What I do think is that Republicans hate Democrats and Democrats hate Republicans. Yeah. And one of the reasons why I think that's perpetuated is because unlike the presidency, you can be in almost every other elected office. You can be in there the rest of your life. Like the president cannot do more than 8 years total, whether it's 8 in a row or, you can't do more than 8. But you can be in Congress. I mean, Joe Biden been in there 40 plus years. Nancy Mooney been in there 40 something years. And so what happens is, because there's no limitation on with their role, what happens is they carry grudges that go back decades, fam. They might remember that you squashed a bill that they needed for their constituency from 87. And so now it's almost like, you know what it's like, bro? It's almost like the Crips and the Bloods. Ironically, they're red and blue, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Ironically, the Crips and the Bloods are red and blue. But politics is almost like that. There is bad blood between the two. You've killed people that I've cared about, which on one sense are bills that they wanted to get passed, or being on committees, or ending someone's political career or something. They carry those grudges. Listen, I'm reformed in my theology. I know some people don't like reformed theology. They don't like Calvinism and all that stuff. I'm not a Calvin because I don't believe everything that Calvin said. I've never called myself a Calvinist. I think that's whack. I'm a biblicist. Calvin, all he did was explain things that are in the Bible. I will never say I'm a Calvinist. I'm a Paulinist, if anything else. But what I noticed though, one doctrine that would be helpful for people is total depravity. Yeah. Like we actually act like politicians, police, and everyone is just pretty much just a few bad apples. Actually, police are the only profession that gets to have a few bad apples. Everybody else is corrupt. Lawyers are corrupt. Politicians are corrupt. Police, no, just a few bad apples. Nah, police are corrupt too, fam. And so what happens is we treat politics as if like these people are mature enough to not have any bitter issues and put what's important to the government, to the people, ahead of their own interests. That's not true. Let me give you proof of that. In 2020, I think it was last, I want to find this article actually. In 2020, Obama hadn't spoken much about the campaign. But as it looked like Bernie Sanders was pulling away, Obama put out a statement that said, I'm paraphrasing, but it said something like this: most Americans don't want their whole world blown up. They don't want, they're not thinking about free colleges and free healthcare. They don't want the world blown up. They just want to see some change and some things faithful. They don't want you to upend. And basically everyone knew what he was saying. They was saying that what Bernie's trying to do is blow up the country in ways that most people aren't thinking. Right. That's Bernie thinking that way. And AOC and the few people that bang with them, most people are not thinking we want to blow everything up, fam. Mm-hmm. You know why? Because people by default don't like change. No. They don't want a lot of change, fam. Mm-hmm. And so the only change that people like is what they found on their couch. They don't want change, right? So what you see is these people, politicians, are able to do things and basically make it seem like you're doing it for the constituency. But in reality, some of those things are just getting back at others for what they did to you and your constituency from decades ago. Right. So politicians, to me, are people who are in a gang that essentially, when you join a gang, you pick up whatever beef they got, right? Once you become a Crip, whatever Bloods that they beefing with, you beefing with. Well, even if you got buddies that are Bloods before then, once you become a Crip, you got to decide what you're going to do. Because if it comes down to it and y'all getting a shootout, what you going to do? It's pretty much similar to me, man. It just doesn't have the same, it's not as criminal as obviously the streets are, but what it does is essentially divide and take up issues, and they get to be in there and Nancy Pelosi's going to be in there probably till she passes away. And think about all the things that she said and done that are just crazy. The president, they get him out of there after no more than 8 years and you out. These people can be, they need to change that and make that be, you only got 4 years, you can do 8 maximum. That's it. These people are just, man, so that's what's happening. It's messing everything up. It's politicians. It's a small band of politicians that they're not new. These people have been in there for decades, man. So anyway, that's the type of stuff I think about with blacks in politics and why that's there.
So there's no light side, dark side when it comes to politics.
I don't think so, man. I think there's position versus position. I think it's just like we agree. This is how we carry it. This is how and we don't want to let them win. It's spy versus spy, bro. But it's not necessarily black versus white or who cares about black people. Nah, this is not true. That's not true at all. In the Uncle Tom documentary that Larry Elder was primarily featured in, him, Candace Owens, and some well-known and some I didn't know black people who basically are saying we are Uncle Toms because we are Republicans that voted for Trump. They were saying that they're Uncle Toms. And the reality is, nah, you're not called an Uncle Tom because you were conservative, Candace Owens. You're called an Uncle Tom because you talk about black people negatively in ways that white people can't, and you enjoy it because you know you can say stuff because you black that if white people said that their lives would be in danger. That's why you do it. Cut it out. Here's some scissors. Voddie is the same way. Let me tell you what Voddie said one time. I watched a sermon or presentation that Voddie gave at a church. This is right before our panel. I was watching, just trying to hear where he's at and see what he thinks about things. And I watched him give this presentation where he shared his testimony also, his statement and all that, his life and what he'd been through, his lived experience. And then at one point during the message, he said, I have magic melanin. And he began to explain that he knew that his being black gave him an advantage on talking about these issues. Listen, people aren't buying fault line. If Voddie, I hate hypothetical statements because it's not true, but I'm going to say this anyway. The reason why I hate hypotheticals is because there's so much true stuff that you can say. I don't need to make up a hypothetical situation.
Right.
Voddie is popping because he's black, fam. And that's what Voddie was basically acknowledging. You're black and you disagree with the black narrative. You're not popping because what you're saying is so vicious. I talked to someone who's very close to the family, and they said that they talk to people who think CRT is a cult. And they said they thought Voddie's book lacked substance. So these are people that you would think would be like, oh, that book is the stuff. They even said. John Harris, the neo-Confederate fake Christian, whatever he thinks he is, this dude, I watched him on his podcast talk about giving it, he read it and enjoys it and is grateful that Voddie wrote it. But then on Goodreads, he gave that joint 3 stars.
Wow. And
people are like, yo, hey, man, I want to hear your perspective, man. I kind of agree. I gave it 3 stars too. I don't know if I really, what's your perspective, right? So it's kind of like, golly. So again, fam, I just think a lot of this stuff, these are perception gaps. These are perception gaps.
A lot of it got a lot of press because of the names that were being dropped.
Oh, of course that. I mean, listen, man, you don't write names about those people and not think it's going to get. And Voddie obviously over the years has developed a name for himself. So he had a platform already. He's the one. I mean, what I'm about to say, I cannot prove this. I don't know. But I'd be curious to know what other white people are going around getting the speaking venues that he is talking about critical race theory and systemic racism. I'm curious. I would be curious to know what black people are getting what white people? I don't think there's many. It's like, because if black people aren't monolithic, they don't even believe that, because if they did, then they would say, all right, then this is what Voddie thinks and these people think differently. It's not, lived experience versus truth. It's accepted lived experience versus unaccepted lived experience. It's just comedy. So all the people on the conservative side, they say, man, you don't listen to our narratives and you don't have that, and the media is biased. Like, fam, when has the media not been biased? Like, I agree that the media is biased, because you know how the media is also biased? They made it seem like white people are not poor and the most on welfare. They made it seem like black people welfare is a black issue. And most people think that, but they don't realize there are more white people on welfare and more white people, and they have like a lot of the same dropout crime rates, all this stuff. There are more white people on welfare. There are more white people who commit these crimes, and they never show them, man. They never show them on. So again, I think you're right. The media is biased, but I don't act like they've been doing us like they biased for us. They've been biased against us for a long time. I take a little bit of spotlight right now. That's how a lot of black people feel. I know some people think a lot of what's going on is just crazy, but they're like, hey, listen, man, I take that over all the years that we didn't have a voice.
Mm-hmm. So you think there's definitely some black tokenism involved here? Not calling anyone a black token, but I'm just saying where those names are being brought up for certain reasons.
So I'll say it. Voddie's a black token. I'll say it. And I don't think he thinks that way, but he's being tokenized by people. And I think he's intelligent enough to know that.
Okay.
Voddie is a black token, 100%. I'm not going to shy away from that. He said to me in my face in front of these people that I'm slandering the church, even though Charles Spurgeon's quote was way more serious than mine. I ain't got no cut cards in that. I'm not afraid of that smoke. I mean, he's a token. And I'm not saying he's a token because of his position. I'm not saying that like, oh, he's a token because he's wrong in what he says. Now, there's some stuff that Voddie says that is accurate. He's a token, though, because they want to use his voice to say, see, there are black people that don't agree. That's why he's a token, not because he's trying to be one or because he disagrees with the black narrative, right? Yeah. He's a token because people are trying to say, because he's black and doesn't agree, or Candace Owen. This is why white conservatives will be like, hey, have you watched this Candace Owens video? And been like, hey, have you watched the tone of the video and the way she, like, do you think that that's God glorifying what she's doing? You're giving me a video basically saying this is what you really think and how you really feel. Do you actually believe that it's God glorifying what she's doing? Like, you think God is pleased with what she just said about George Floyd? And highlighting the fact that this dude has a criminal record and black people always celebrate the worst of their kind. And excuse me, Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, and a lot of them Confederate boys, they got monuments, they got schools, cities, army bases. They got memorabilia sold every year to promote the people who were traitors. You know what I'm saying? Like, what are you talking about? That's what I mean. That's what I'm talking about. It's just that's another one of them. You critique what you celebrate. It's like, get out of here, man. Some of us is actually sharp around here, you know?
Well, one thing that we did conclude today is, again, blacks are not monolithic.
We're not monolithic, bro. And even when they said, I watched some video for some black girl named Gothics. My man showed me this, and he was like, she gonna be the next Candace Owens. And she basically does something like this. Well, she's on that side. She was like, well, there's two types of black people. There's people that think the systemic racism exists, and then people that don't. I was like, no. There's people in the middle. Those aren't the only two options. You know what I'm saying? Those aren't my options. I'm not one or the other. I'm a hybrid of both of those things. That's the difference. Because to me, there is some truth in some of these things. Yeah. But it all depends on definitions. Yeah. All depends on definitions. Wow. If you say, well, there's no laws on the books that are racist, if I show you laws on the books, then will you say, Virginia has over 100 laws that are racist. Alabama, Arizona, and Mississippi still have laws on the books that are racist. So what do you mean? Do you mean that there's no law on the books, or that they can be on the books but they're not apply? Like, what is it? What are we talking about? You know, but largely, I think a lot of what we're experiencing, brother, is not systemic racism. It's systemic consequences for that racism is what people are talking about. I think that the way that same way they view black people as less of a human being, the same way they think that there's going to be no traumatic imprint left on the black community after civil rights and all that happened after that. Like Jim Crow and slavery, that was one thing, but all the things that happened after those things, they felt like there was not going to be any traumatic imprint, that black people would not tell their kids and warn their kids of things, and that wouldn't just go over time, mature through the generations. You cannot tell people, hey, all right, you were wrong and we're going to change some laws and apologize, and hold no one to justice and expect it to be okay. At the cross, you get justice, you get reconciliation, and the ability for forgiveness. You cannot move on and just say we're reconciled if there was not justice done. And I think that's what happened. There was not justice. That's the problem. And so what we're seeing is the reverberation of and I think honestly the Lord is behind it. I mean, God is sovereign. Like, this is what I think. Okay, Lord, what are you doing right now? What are you allowing to happen? And here's how I answer that. I think, okay, he doesn't say, well, Curtis, here's what I'm doing. When I ask him that, I pray and I ask that, I say, okay, Ephesians 5:11, expose the deeds of darkness. Okay, what are you exposing? That's how I answer. God, what are you doing? That's one of the things I answer. Okay, God, what are you doing? Okay, what is he exposing? Man, look at the state of the church right now. The lovelessness in the church, fam. Also, the self-righteousness over this. It's just like, wow, this is what he's exposing. This is what he's doing. He's exposing the deeds of darkness, and it's not just one way. Listen, this stuff is bisexual, bro. It goes both ways, fam. This stuff is not one way, fam. This is it. So anyway, man, I just think, all right, Lord, I'm gonna stay balanced. I'm staying right here. I see both sides. I see evil on both sides. I see good on both sides. I'm not allowing myself to be pulled into no side. If that makes people angry, then man, take a number.
That's good. There were some things that were said in this episode that I know we're gonna get into in depth. Next episode, I'm hoping to get into theoletics. I know that's your term. I hope
theological.
I hope you put some type of copyright on that term.
I need to. As a matter of fact, I'm glad my man works for that. I might have to do that.
Yeah.
Theological gospel.
That's a really good term. We're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into the church, the blacks in the church, the Black Reformed Church. I mean everything. I'm hoping to venture our way from justice to politics and social issues to dealing with it in the church. So
I'm with it.
Next episode,
I'll take you about this conference. It's 2009 All Black Reformed Pastors Conference in Miami. Everybody was. I mean, it wasn't everybody, but I was there. Thabiti was there. Voddie was there. Yeah, that's gonna be it. I tell you about all that. That was an interesting time back then.
I'm putting that in my notes right now. You said
2009. It was down in Miami.
Okay.
It was at Glendale Baptist Church.
Okay.
That was a wild time.
2009.
I was there, front and center.
That's what's up. Well, let's definitely talk about that the next time. Curt, thanks again for
absolutely, brother.
For sliding through and just giving your input on all of the things that I asked you about.
Absolutely, man. My privilege, man. Love talking to you about this stuff, bro.
Absolutely. This has been episode 2 of the Saint Life Podcast. I will check you guys out next time. God bless you.